All right, we're going to start in like 10 seconds. Welcome everybody to the first of six Sophie and Alex Rosner seminars in health, history, and social justice. Most, I think, will be online this year. I'm really excited to welcome our amazing first speaker, Stacy Davis Gates. She is the vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union, the CTU. And I'll say much more about her in 1 second. I first want to begin, though, by just quickly thanking Lupe Coyle at the CPU, Simon Mack for helping us with the Zoom technology here, my co-host and amazing graduate student, Sadie Bergen, today, who is also going to be assisting with some logistics. And then finally, Robert Block, the CTU's attorney, for helping us get in touch with Stacy in the first place. We'll also have all this on YouTube and Vimeo and other platforms later. First thing, though, as we do at the top of each of these lectures, we just like to explain who they are named after. Sophie and Alex Rosner were the parents of David Rosner, one of our distinguished faculty members and a historian of public health. And quite appropriate for today, Sophie was a school teacher and Alex was the editor of a community newspaper for New York City's working class Hungarian population. And both of them were very active in civil rights and labor organizing. And for that, they paid a price. Alex Rosner was actually called before the House Un-American Activities Committee during the era of McCarthyism. And both he and Sophie suffered professional retribution for their activities. We have a variety of people who speak in this series, but I think the big unifier among them is people who not only point out all the social injustices of society, but actively work to fix them, in all those injustices, in substantial ways, and that can inspire and instruct all of us here. And I think that's doubly important in these perilous times where, as you saw last night, there's a lot of vile sentiment and hatred out in this world. Stacy Davis Gates is our speaker. For more than a decade, she was a social studies teacher. She's now the vice president of the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union, and the executive VP, vice president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. Before she became vice president, she was also the political and legislative director for the CTU. And Chicago Magazine recently named her one of the 50 most powerful women in Chicago, and for very good reason. The CTU is a very special union and social justice organization. This past decade, it called and won 2 successful strikes, one in 2012, one in 2019. And each time it simultaneously issued demands centered on teachers' economic welfare, but also that of students and the communities they live in. And when you think about the successes of organized labor and even the revival of it in the past 10 years, including at this very institution, you can't do it without talking about the CTU and having it at the front of your mind. And Vice President Gates is a big part of why that is the case. The format for this is going to be really simple. Vice President Gates will start with some short remarks about the CTU and labor organizing, and then I'm going to ask her a series of questions about herself, the CTU's approach, political organizing, and this very uneasy time we're living in with multiple crises going on. And then for the remaining 25 minutes or so, we'll take some questions. So if you want to ask a question, just type it in that Q&A box. You can start now, you can start whenever. And me or my co-host will see it, we'll read them out. And if you want to read it out on video, just type video somewhere and we'll flip your mic and camera on. So without further delay, Vice President Gates, we are so honored and so thrilled to have you here. You are a hero, a superhero to many people in this virtual room. There are so many things going on in Chicago schools today that we're really appreciative that you carved out some time for us. Thank you so much. And without further delay, Vice President Stacy Gates.
Hey, thank you for that amazing introduction. I don't read my own biography, busy working. That being said, I do want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to convene with you today. I am actually going to limit this type of connection because this is actually not a connection. This is me talking at people. And, I believe perhaps this is about my training as a teacher, but I believe that we learn more when we are engaged in, dialogue, to be honest with you. So I'm going to say a few things and then hurry to engage with the folks that I can't see on the screen right now. At any rate, shouts out to the grad students at Columbia. Like, I understand that you all are currently bargaining and the boss is driving a hard bargain. But what I want to say is that that's their job, and your job is to drive a hard bargain too. Your job is to, list out your demands and make sure that you get what you need and most of what you want. Your job is also to stay in solidarity with one another and to air out grievances at the kitchen table, get those things fixed, and then go fight the real enemy. I don't believe in intramurals. I believe that, when you are together within a union, that it is okay to have critical discourse, but it is more important to stay united and to clarify what you need within your objectives and work damn hard to see them as outcomes. So that's important. Stay strong, stay unified, and be clear about what you're fighting for. And don't leave that table until you have the infrastructure for the next set of fights, because that's the most important part. A contract does not give you the thing that you need always, but the fight for the contract gives you the infrastructure to continue to fight for all of the things that you need. So that's important. And I think that's how I tend to focus myself when I'm in these, what seems like never ending fights. That being said, CTU became a different type of union back in 2010. Karen Lewis got us together. I am a founding member of our caucus, its core. And it was a group of teachers who had been foreclosed. I worked at a high school, and Arnie Duncan came into the Lorraine Hansberry Theater, and he told us that we were failing and that they were going to close, which it was surreal because it was my first year working in the Chicago public schools. Obviously, I had an experience in the school that demonstrated to me that the issues we were experiencing were connected almost exclusively to the fact that Black children were in the school. And the way in which these discussions happen about education, public education of Black students here in Chicago, they were disconnected from the racism that we were experiencing in that community, from the white supremacy that undergirds the decisions that are being made to intentionally destabilize communities of color. And he was telling us, right, the community of parents, the community of students, the community of people, what he was going to do for us instead of the self-determined space that is necessary to transform spaces that have been dismantled because white supremacy. So there was a group of us who had experienced very similar things throughout the city who said, this is not right, this is unjust, and that we have an entity, our union, who should fight against this. And not the narrow, I need a job somewhere next year after you close my school, but the vision to understand that union has to mean something bigger, something more robust, something more diverse than the people who identify as dues paying members. Our union, our constituencies, the people we serve, all of them don't pay dues. right? They're our students, they're the families we serve, and they are the inhabitants of the communities that we serve. So we have intentionally defined union broader. And I think that doing so has allowed us to be very clear about schools being a social center, but unions also being a, a force in creating the equity, the justice that we need to see in our society. Look, I'm gonna keep it 100. It has been very hard to get up every morning and figure out how to continue to do this work. Um, Last night, bless our hearts, front and center, we saw the President of the United States behave in a manner that is undeniably irresponsible, racist, and dangerous. And folks can center on this both-ism and their headlines and their critique and their talking head reports in the media. But what we have to be clear about is that you heard the President of the United States tell white supremacists to come get people and intimidate them from actually voting. You also heard the President of the United States tell us that he ain't leaving. Like, folks can parse out those words if they want to. And he was very clear in saying that he does not believe that this process is going to be fair to him and to his supporters. And so if we absorb that in the way that I just kind of outlined that, then we know that the work that we do in whatever sphere that we work in is going to be important in outlining the needs of the people in this country who are suffering the most under white supremacy and under his very proud flag waving of white supremacy. We got a lot of work to do. That being said, one of the things that I'm tracking is that mainstream media, perhaps, white folks, perhaps, white supremacists, perhaps, are using Black pain, the marginalization of Black people, to levy an argument about how they have to restart the economy. And they're doing that because they want to push us back into our public school buildings. So Black parents, Latinx parents can go back to serving folks in restaurants, can go back to the nursing homes and the hospitals where they work, can continue driving buses and trains. We know that the folks that are working and holding our communities down, they look like meat. And because of that, the kids that we serve in our large urban areas, New York City, you're experiencing it right now, Chicago, LA, their parents have to go back to work. Their family members, their caregivers have to go back to work. And so that means that they have to make us believe that buildings that do not have ventilation systems, buildings that have been overstuffed with children for generations, are now safe in the middle of a pandemic to receive our children back. And so what I'm saying is that be very clear that the expression of Black pain, the expression of our marginalization, the expression of our activism is being manipulated by those who want to offer solutions that will put us in just as much danger as we were in last March when we were in our classrooms. Let that sink in a little bit and be vigilant about how we read, right? How we discern what we read, and then how we express the impact. And so for me in Chicago at this moment, what I will say is that we have a population of students that are majority Black students, majority brown students, in a low income school district. You know, I think over 80% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so some politicians want us to believe that I can send my 3 children back, because this isn't something that's detached from me. I live in a Black community, I have Black children, and they attend the public schools. And so my advocacy, I wish it could just come from a work experience, but it comes from a lived experience, it comes from a personal experience. That being said, we have to, I make an argument that if this work isn't personal to you, you will burn out and it will cease being the thing that it needs to be, because it's hard. The wins aren't always obvious. And it's emotionally taxing. So you have to be able to clarify who you're doing it for, why you're doing it, and what you hope to win because of the work you're doing. I situate my framework in the people who need it the most. So the justice-minded union comes from a very pragmatic place. You are serving a population of people who are of color and who have been left behind by the system of capitalism. So if your work is only about you and is disconnected from them, then it is marginal at best and probably irresponsible at worst. Look, remote learning, I'm not gonna make a play to like put remote learning on a pedestal, but I am gonna say that remote learning is a consequence of a pandemic that has not been controlled by federal leadership, a pandemic that has ravaged communities of color, poor people, and a pandemic that has largely exposed to the rest of the world, not because we didn't know, but because we had to sit with it. That poverty, that the lack of health access to healthcare, that the defunding of public education over time has put us into a position where we don't even have a choice but to do remote learning. You won't find a teacher who's saying that this is the best way to do things, but you will find a chorus of teachers throughout this country who will say, you have defunded my school over the last couple of generations. You have made it impossible for the families that I serve to have access to healthcare, to have jobs that pay them a living wage and that keep them safe. And now you want schools to reopen that are ill-equipped because their ventilation systems are relics of the 19th and 20th centuries. And you want those kids to come back into a school community with an aging staff, with an aging group of educators, and we're supposed to just make it work. That's a tall order. And that order is being placed upon workers who are largely female. So all of these things that we talk about in this country that don't work, that have all these isms attached to it, we're in that moment right now. And if we are not organized, if we are not clear about our work, if we're not clear about why we're doing our work and for whom we're doing it for, then we're going to get caught up in this thing that doesn't make sense. We have to be clear, we have to remain focused, and we have to be unapologetic about who we are fighting for, why we're fighting for them, and what it means to fight for them. And period. The Chamber of Commerce is not going to stand down. Wall Street is not going to stand down. Billionaires are having the time of their life, making money hand over fist, right? And so why would we cower? Why would we mute ourselves? And why would we be ashamed that we are going to keep people safe and we are going to do the best that we can to offer the best type of education we can? But pivot from that and say this, that if we are finally clear about the lives of Black children, about the lives of Latinx children, about the lives of working class and impoverished children, pardon me, children living in poverty, then what are we willing to do to make this work when it is safe to work? Are we willing to overhaul ventilation systems in the hood? Are we willing to finally fund schools at the level in which they have needed for generations? Are we willing to allow Black parents, brown parents, immigrant parents, working class parents, parents living in poverty to determine the type of curriculum and school policy that is necessary to edify those who come into our classrooms? And if those who are pushing this narrative can't tell us yes, then they ain't really trying to help us. What they are trying to do is jumpstart an economy that doesn't see our humanity. Jumpstart an economy that was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. Jumpstart an economy that still owes a debt to their descendants. Jumpstart an economy where immigrants are paying more taxes than the President of the United States of America, but cannot fully participate in life, whose family members are trapped in concentration camps at the border, where women, their uterus are being taken from them. We cannot allow this discussion to veer from what it is to what the economy needs it to be. So draw a line in the sand. Dare them to cross it. Draw a line in the sand. Challenge these racist assumptions, these sexist assumptions. Draw a line in the sand and fight for the people who need us the most.
Thank you so much for those introductory remarks, Vice President Gates. It was incredibly powerful to hear not only about the union, but also the connections that the union and yourself tries to draw between larger societal problems, and also situating it not in just this short-term arc, but really kind of 20 years of disinvestment and other kinds of like social political pathologies. I wanted to pick up on all these important threads that you talked about, but I wondered if we could actually pick up on one that that you mentioned towards the end, which is that this work is not just, well, it's incredibly personally meaningful to you and comes out of your own biography. And one of the things that is always fascinating about the speakers in this series is just hearing how they got in to what they are doing. So I was wondering if we could just talk, if you could talk a little bit about yourself, how you entered the teaching profession, and then what I call the light bulb moment. That is when you really kind of just started thinking about power, politics, and inequality, and then how that eventually leads to you getting more involved in union activities all the way up to your position now.
I've never not understood inequality. My granny, my mother's mother, she was transparent in how she experienced life as a Black woman from Eudora, Arkansas. She was a teenage mother. She lived in poverty. She picked cotton. Like, I am literally one generation removed from the cotton field, the plantation. And so being able to hear a Black woman who left the South with 2 babies on her hip, she left with their father, to migrate to Chicago first and then to Indiana for work, who raised her children in public housing, to see her work hard and to leave a legacy for her family members has informed the way in which I see the world. My other grandmother, whose story is much the same, but being a Black woman in America and having to make choices about survival, having to make choices about what their children needed, having to defer their wants, their dreams, and their hopes it helps to inform how I see the world. And then becoming an educator was about empowerment. Like, I always had a tough time in my classroom because it's a classroom full of Black children is formulated under the guise of rules, policies, and your behavior, even as a teacher, is governed by grades, test scores, time in their seat. And it didn't make sense because everyone that I had encountered in my life who made it wasn't about their ability to check a box or bubble in A, B, C, or D on a standardized test. It was always about their ability to see what other folks weren't able to see and then be able to execute it, right? Like when you think about people who make it, they're visionaries. I think we attach that to them. But what we do to Black children in public schools is that, and it ain't just Black children, it's Latinx children too, it's immigrant children as well. We regulate them we socialize them. We provide pedagogy to maintain their servitude in this economy. We really are not teaching them a pedagogy of self-determination, of freedom, of power. You know, we're teaching them that you got to play by rules that are not made for your edification, but for your subjugation, and that you have to maintain a politic of respectability in order to be seen. And what that does is that it disconnects. It pushes our children away from being able to see themselves, explore, make mistakes, fail, and use all of those experiences to inform their self-determined direction in this life. You know, they deserve that. And in many of our schools, it's about penalty, it's about following a rule, it's about zero tolerance. And what we do is that, one, we prepare them for the penal system, mass incarceration. And what we do is that we steal their ability to dream and to envision a life and an environment where they get to say whatever they want to say, whatever they want to do, and that they get to try. Like we take that from them. So, you know, life experience, like why not them? Why can't they? You know, we should be the beneficiaries of the largesse of this country. And so many times we're put into positions where we have to defend our very humanity. You've seen it all summer.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to talk about the 2019 strike, which I think addressed many of the things you just talked about. A student of mine gave a presentation about the CTU and the strike. And she said that the reason why she wanted to present on the CTU was that the contract demands really stuck out at her. And because it wasn't just about wages and benefits, important as they are, the contract also addressed housing instability and the plight of undocumented students, and especially having social services in schools, particularly a social worker and a nurse. And, you know, that's especially powerful in a city like Chicago, like New York, that's profoundly racially segregated, economically unequal. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how CTU came to tie traditional labor demands with these larger community demands, social service needs, and so forth.
I would like to say that we were the smartest people on earth, and that's not true. I think what's true is this, is that, one, we made a decision that our union is our community, our school community, the communities we live in, the communities our families live in, the families that we serve live in. And so that's our union. We changed our constitution a couple of years ago. And in our constitution, we are being very intentional in saying that our mission is to struggle for racial, social, economic, and educational justice. That is our work, right? That's number one. I think number two is, if you look at the origins of the billionaire effort for school deform, and Karen said deform because it ain't reform, it's deform. If you look at the underpinnings of that, what they were able to do quite successfully is to steal the civil rights of public education. Basically, you had a whole bunch of billionaires come in and fund all of these groups and say, look, education isn't working. Never once saying that we are defunding education, right? We are marginalizing the very communities where schools are located to ensure its instability. But they skipped past the context and went directly to the conclusion that they had already manufactured and said it didn't work. And that because it's not working, that it is an injustice to Black children. And you see Black children, right? And we can't deny the impact because it was obvious. What we didn't do well, teachers unions, is also clarify contacts, calls, and infrastructure. There is no way that a teachers union in any urban environment whose members serve communities of color, there is no way that you can do your work without having a critique about white supremacy. Because you can't explain anything that you're experiencing without being able to identify white supremacy as the author of how we are experiencing things in our world. And so what we are doing at CTU, and we're not perfect, right? We are an American institution. And I mean that in every sense of the word of an American institution. And our leadership and our members have been clear about leading from a place of community, leading from a place of bargaining for the common good, which to me makes sense. We are practitioners of the common good, right? What we're doing is offering a publicly funded education to all who come into our doors, regardless of what's happening. And so when all who come into our doors are also experiencing homelessness, then you have to have some sort of answer for that. When students are coming into your doors being judged by a standardized testing instrument that is a byproduct of the eugenics movement, then you have to say that. Because what they're doing is using that instrument to get the result that they know that they're going to get, and then they're going to foreclose on your community and say that the school can't get this right because they can't take this test, never once telling us where the test came from and why the test even exists. And that the answer and that the conclusion that the test is going to draw is a conclusion that continues to help defund us, to marginalize us, and to take away from us. And so here we are at the intersection of everything that we've fought for and fought against in the last 10 years. We have schools that don't have nurses, but they want to reopen them, right? You hear the arguments. Early childhood learners and special education learners are most, and English language learners are most vulnerable in this moment. That's what we're hearing, right? What they also aren't saying is that not only are they most vulnerable in this moment with respect to education, their families are also most vulnerable for unemployment, for evictions, for homelessness, for COVID-19. Their families have experienced COVID-19. And so having an argument about opening the doors to a school building, we can do that. Sure, why not? Levying a debate and drawing a line in the sand, though, about the infrastructure of this inequality is the only debate. Because you can send children back into buildings, and those buildings are ill-prepared and ill-equipped to receive them. Why would I trust a system to erect sneeze guards in a office or to space student desks in classrooms? Why would I trust that system to keep my children safe when it's the same system that is going to put a standardized test in front of them so we can continue to prove eugenics right? We have to be clear about the ideology that is leading the decisions with respect to school policy. And we believe at the Chicago Teachers Union that it's not just our job to talk about wages and benefits, especially if you're like me and you live in a working class community where my wages and benefits have not stopped violence, where my wages and benefits have not stopped the foreclosure of my neighbor's home, and neighborhoods where I can't walk my children down the street and drop them off at school. My wages and benefits go but so far. I need to have a community where my wages and benefits are a benefit to the community. So our viewpoint on this is that schools are only successful, students only achieve within the construct of a community plan. You can't tell me you love my children and I'm making less than $15 an hour. So you're gonna save my children, right? But you're gonna let me languish? We're one, we're in the same unit. So you have to call out the inconsistencies, you have to call out the lies.
I wanted to pick up on something that you talked about in your opening remarks and also just now, and it was about the punitive zero tolerance type of policy that has crept into a lot of public schools in the United States. The CTU and you yourself have been very vocal about police brutality and racism. There have been egregious examples of it in Chicago, not just in the past few years, but for decades. And this summer, there was and continues to be a groundswell of protest in response to the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks. How do you see this? The CTU has already been active on this issue, but how do you see this continuing to inform the link that the CTU has drawn between, a racist and brutal law enforcement police apparatus and the work of a labor union? How is this shaping what the CTU will be doing or has been doing?
When you call out the names of those who have experienced brutality here in the city of Chicago, you're also calling out the names of students who were on rosters and school buildings where our educators work. When you begin to see the humanity of communities of color, then you also feel the pain, right? You also connect to that. One of the things that we don't want our members thinking is that they're there to save people. We are here to dismantle systems of oppression. And in dismantling systems of oppression, I don't think that there's any system that can get away scot-free in America. And so policing is such a system. Public education is such a system. The American labor movement is such a system as well, right? The critique is broad. What we want to do is eradicate white supremacy, empower communities of color, provide spaces in which communities of color can be self-determined. So if that is our work, then all of our systems have to go through some sort of transformation in order to get to the outcome that we want to live in. Also, if you look at the young people leading, it's not just those who have been murdered, it's also those who are resisting. And if you are an educator and you taught Black children, to see young organizers, young Black organizers, be very clear and courageous and brilliant in their expression, that is every single teacher's best case scenario. So here's the thing, people say, why? I don't know how you can't, I don't know how you can be an educator and not see their activism, their organization, their clarity, and not say, whatever you need, we are supporting you, we are allies, we need to become accomplices, right? That's our work. It's that is the thing we want. And we also have to begin seeing them as American patriots. What are the activists doing, the organizers in BLM? They are doing the same thing as those who provoked, instigated the American Revolution. They are doing the same exact thing. They are making this country better. They are opening it up. In fact, I would offer that the organizing that they're doing now is more important because it is more inclusive. It's not just about winning space for rich white men. It is about opening up the space through the lens of Black women, right? And when Black women win, everyone wins, right? Because we can see everyone else. We value everyone else. We see their humanity. We see their value. And so the work that they are doing right now is both patriotic and necessary. And I think all of labor, not just teachers' unions, all of America has to embrace their courage, has to support the work, and has to identify them as American patriots.
We're going to go to questions in just a moment, and just a reminder of how to ask a question. You just go to the Q&A, you type the question, and if you want to ask it on video, just type video or something like that, and your mic and video will get turned on. I want to ask one final thing. You've been a long-time organizer for a while, and I wondered, because we have lots of young people at this event, and many of them are either interested in political organizing or active in it, what's a tip that people ought to keep in mind when they're having interpersonal conversations and interactions with people and trying to persuade them either to vote a certain way on something like a strike, or simply to just join in some kind of initiative, or to see the world in a different way? What are some ways that you found effective for engaging people in these kind of intimate one-on-one type of encounters?
I think you have to engage. You have to be curious about who the people are, meet them where they are, and challenge them to envision the world that we need to build, to create together. This work that we're doing is that we are applying theories of change, right? And a part of organizing is getting people to reimagine. But first, you got to engage. You know, many of us, look, it's not easy. Look, anything that CTU does and that you all see, it comes as a result of one-on-one conversations, small group discussions, larger group meetings. It comes as a result of debate, right? Sometimes you win those debates. Sometimes you learn a lot from those debates in order to erect the next debate. It comes from working with a group of people who have shared values and principles, who are clear about the struggle, the time that it will take, the emphasis on recruiting people to the struggle. So those are the things I think is important, but it also has to be connected to your own personal ideology. Like, this is not just a job. This is, it's a lifestyle, to be perfectly honest. It's a lifestyle that the people who love you, hopefully they buy into as well, because you'll need them to. Parents will especially need that, because lots of long nights, lots of juggling of schedules and so forth. But I think at the very basic level, it requires us to clarify our values and our principles, to work with those who share them, but to also engage, encounter, and be okay with having tough conversations with people, and trusting that if you engage, that there is an ability that you have to win more people to your theory, to your vision of transformation.
Excellent. I'm gonna read a couple questions. I think these two are quite similar, so I'm gonna try to merge them on the spot here. But a couple folks asked, have you encountered from, I would say, more traditional unions some resistance to this model that combines community alliances and racial justice work to the quote unquote traditional work of unions? And how do you respond to that if there is that kind of resistance?
So a couple of things. We encounter it within our union. It's still a part of dues paying members in our union. We have a conservative, minority within the union who believe that our work should only center on wages and benefits, period. And our workplace. That's it. Obviously, we have more members who think otherwise. And absolutely, you have other labor who look at us as if we have two heads and three arms. They don't get it. The concept of unionism for them is just protecting what you have. And look, I'm also a history teacher, and that's just not how it's ever worked. Transformation and change happens because you organize for it. And you can't just organize the people in your four walls. Transformation happens because we're talking to a lot of different people and we're getting them to understand the vision of community and the resources that are necessary to shift from this deficit governing, right? Because we're heading into depression territory, which means we're going to go back to austerity. Like, I'm talking to you all in New York. You already saw the budget from last spring, right? You're seeing the budgets being talked about on the city level right now. You already know that austerity is racist and is sexist. Like, I don't have to tell you that. And you also understand that austerity is why we are in this position right now, why COVID has ravaged communities of color, right? We know that. The question is not just our ability to outline those facts, but it is our ability to create a strategy that gives us more partners, allies, and accomplices in dismantling this idea that rich people get to make more money and working people get to pay more of their money to a safety net that is shredded, right? We are literally working in a country where the top 1% has amassed more in the pandemic while we send Black women into nursing homes, while we allow Black men to die in prison. It's all wrong. And if we believe in change, then we believe that we have to ally ourselves, across the board. And I'll close on this. The one force that is sufficiently positioned right now to provide the most pushback is the movement for Black lives.
I think that ties well with this next question. This is someone who I think is a teacher. First, just praises you and the work of the caucus. Unbelievable, powerful framing and work. But the person is from a smaller Midwestern city and is starting to form a caucus kind of like CORE in the CTU, kind of like your caucus, and asks, what advice would you have for a caucus in the early stages of organizing?
Ground yourself in a particular, make sure that the people in the creation of it have some shared ideology, have shared worldviews, and are also working hand in glove with those who are living in the community where the impacts are being felt the most. The best thing that I think our caucus did was meet up with Pilsen Alliance and the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. These were two organizations, Pilsen, Latinx, Cocoa Black, who were already doing the work, who had already like run, you know, they had sounded the alarm already, and they were in the trenches. We joined them, right? It wasn't the other way around. We saw coalition work as a means to transformation. And coalition work also means that they get to talk, they get to make decisions, and they get to have a vote. Sure, we were a part of a caucus, a group of educators, and the only way it was going to work, though, is if it was grounded in the work of coalition that sees the community as a vital, important, unexchangeable part of the theory of transformation. So I hope that helped.
Absolutely. This next question, I think, ties into both the biographical element, but also just the working with people and talking to people question earlier. But it's a question from somebody who asks how your pedagogy has informed your activism. I guess the many classroom years you had as a social studies and history teacher, how has that informed your activism?
I think it was because I wasn't able to see my pedagogy in my classroom is what inspired the activism. You know, sometimes you lose your imagination, you see all of the barriers, and you see your explicit work in the system that helps to marginalize the very people that you claim you want to help. Like, I was an actor in test taking, right? I already knew what the test was going to say. So why am I willingly participating in passing out this number 2 pencil? Be in my classroom when the bell rings. Make sure you're working on the bell ringer, not how are you doing? How was your evening? Because there was nothing that I could do with it when they told me that their buddy got shot. There was nothing to do with, you know, what do you do with that? There ain't no social worker there. My training is limited, right? What do I do with that? What did I do with it when there was one of my students being trafficked? Like, human trafficking, my student. Her pimp came to the school. Like, it blew my mind what I was experiencing, and had very limited expertise to deal with. My pedagogy was one thing, my reality was a different thing. And then there was this chasm in between the two. And very few of us get mentors and guides in this journey in public education. Very few of us get this reflection where we can examine and critique our own practice. And I think it wasn't as much as my pedagogy that informed my activism, but it was my inability to create a space within my classroom and my school community that gave space to my students being able to see themselves as human beings, worthy of funding, worthy of self-determination, worthy of really a world-class education and experience. I didn't want to continue to be complicit. I didn't want to be an actor in their marginalization. And so that's what informed, that is what gets me to where I am.
Our last question, and thank you so much again for carving out this hour, Vice President Gates. Last question is about kind of the future of the labor movement. That on one hand, you have a lot of inspirational victories this past decade, including the 2 CTU strikes, but also in this post-Janus decision world, a lot of attacks on unions, and particularly public sector unions and NLRB shenanigans and so forth. So if you're looking kind of at the next, I mean, you and I were talking a little earlier, and it seems like something changes every day. So it's hard to kind of project long-term anything these days. But if you had to do that for the labor movement, seeing both these incredible victories, but also these new barriers that seem like they're on the way, how do you kind of see things going forward?
So when I look at when you review the casualties of COVID-19, like those who have lost their lives, they're workers. They drove buses, they operated trains, they worked in nursing homes and hospitals. They were workers. Women, people of color, right? And so if the labor movement hopes to be powerful, relevant, and a challenge to the status quo, not just the voice or the photograph on a mailer, right? Don't just come pick me up for a speech or come grab me for a photo shoot, but the actual policies, the strategies, the direction, the heart and mind of the union space has to reflect those who are doing the work. So if we don't see intentional strategies, campaigns that focus on women, that are led by women, that focus on communities of color, then it doesn't matter. Labor has been instrumental in keeping more people safe than have perished because of COVID. And erecting my Black female status is not enough. It also has to look like it also has to be led in the same way. So if you have the greatest amount of skin in the game, then at some point that should lead the strategy. That should be the leadership. And so we're gonna have to push labor very hard to relinquish this look, this caricature of the 2 people you saw on the stage yesterday or last night. That's not the workforce right now. Those are not those who have lost their lives to COVID. And so that's one. And I think in 2, in general, you just have to be unapologetic about it. And labor has to be uncomfortable. Labor has to be made to transform. And it ain't easy. Our union is still in the process. It's a journey. It is not a destination. We are not going to wake up one day and it works. We're going to wake up one day and we're going to have to continue to make it work. And that's the toughest part of this work, to know that every day you wake up, there's a new fight, or it's the same fight, and that you're going to have to continue to push. You know, the complication is that we think that we're going to outsmart capitalism. We ain't going to outsmart capitalism. We're going to beat capitalism. We're not going to outsmart white supremacy. We're going to beat white supremacy. Like this whole concept that this is an intellectual exercise, not so much. It's a dog fight.
I think that's, both something that can be sobering, but also something I think fundamentally optimistic at the very end, if one remembers that. Vice President Gates, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you again for coming here, or for coming here virtually, And when we get to the other side of this, I really want to bring you here to New York City so we can talk to you in person. But thank you so much. The CTU
Thank you.
and your caucus, for so many of us, when we're feeling down, we really look to organizations like yours for examples that there is sometimes light at the end of a really kind of awful tunnel. So thank you again, and we really appreciate your time here.
Thank you. And y'all keep doing the work. When we fight, we win.
That's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.